Hi guys, I'm Erin and welcome back to my channel. Today I am reviewing One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This came out on September 27th, which should be just a few days prior to when this gets posted, should it get posted when I intended. So this is a adult fantasy release. It is the first in what I believe is supposed to be a duology, and it is set in this landlocked kingdom, or landlocked isolated, I suppose is the more correct word, an isolated kingdom that, due to the after effects of this curse from like years prior to the start of this book, they are isolated by this magical mist that surrounds in the forests around the kingdom, and it's very dangerous to enter the mist. You can't really do it and expect to like survive well, and so you don't, and therefore they're isolated. In addition, the curse also left them with this fever that pops up in people around the kingdom, and if you get this fever, you're supposed to be reported to the king and you get taken away by the physicians because it's very dangerous to have the fever and you can't just like live with it. Part of the fever also, if you survive it, leaves you with some kind of like magical residue. So we follow our main character, Elspeth, who survived the fever and managed to hide the fact that she had it. She's sheltered with her aunt and uncle, and they kept her secret. And so she's living kind of in the town still, and it is not known that she had the fever and as such survived. So that is our main character here. So now, as a result of surviving this fever, she has gained this kind of magical ability that ties into the magic system of this world, which is essentially tarot cards that have different powers. And so part of her kind of magical deal is she, years before the start of this novel, touched one of these tarot cards and absorbed this nightmare spirit into her mind, and he just kind of lives there. And like sometimes he talks to her or can like influence things, and he kind of has magic powers through her, or she has like another magic power kind of through him. And that's kind of what the setup of this book is her with this nightmare spirit kind of living in her brain. So I really enjoyed this book quite a lot. I'll kind of break it down as far as like different parts of the book. So I want to start talking off with the setting and atmosphere, because I've heard this book blurbed as gothic fantasy, and I think this is specifically a good descriptor when we're talking about the atmosphere and the setting of this book, because the atmosphere and like this kingdom, big gothic vibes. So because the kingdom is isolated, and the whole mist thing definitely made me feel reminiscent of kind of like the foggy moors and like kind of like a Wuthering Heights kind of setting, which is kind of what I think of when I think of a gothic setting, or at least one of the things I think of is just this kind of like foggy, isolated castle kind of setting, which is what it is. Also, because of that mist and kind of the fever and kind of the nightmare spirit in Elspeth's head, all of that kind of combined to just give just the feel of the book kind of this dreary vibes. And like it didn't feel like you're out on a sunny day, like walking around town, the sun was shining. Like it kind of felt like it would be this overcast, kind of dark feeling, all these elements together. So I think as far as the setting, Gothic is a really good descriptor in my opinion of kind of the kind of setting and vibes that the book gives off. Beyond the setting, the next thing I want to talk about is the magic in this, because that's probably what my favorite part of this book was. So the magic is tied into tarot cards, or tarot card-esque things. It's not an actual tarot card deck, but it is a similar concept in that you have this deck called the Providence cards, and I think there's 12 different pictures, and each one, so like there's like one picture that you have one card of, one picture there's two of, one there's three of, all the way down to one of them, but there's 12 of that picture. Kind of like the 12 Days of Christmas song, I suppose. And so each card has its own power that if you were wielding the card, like you had the card, you could use its power. And then if you like tap the card, you could turn the power off so you weren't just constantly using it, which I thought was really interesting. I really liked how the usage of these cards was like literally anyone could use them. If you picked it up, you could just do it, and that was it. Like you didn't really need to train, and like there's no like magic school to train it. There was no inherent power that was like hereditary or like born with. You could just use any of the cards, which I thought was interesting. And also with the magic, each card's magic came at a price, which I also appreciated, kind of the balance of using magic versus the cost of using magic, and each one had its unique price kind of that reflected against what the power itself was. So like some of the examples of what some of the cards were, like there's one that if you're using it, you could kind of glamour yourself to look prettier, and the cost of that one was you kind of lost the warmth of your personality. If you used it too long, you kind of just became this cold person beneath the beautiful face. Others, there was like one that you could see your enemies. There was one that had to do with compelling people to do what you say, all those kinds of things. So I really enjoyed that. I really liked the way those cards were used. And segueing into plot, the cards themselves is a big part of the plot point, as they're not just here's the magic window dressing for the plot. So for the plot of this book, Elspeth ends up running into, so she's hiding her nightmare thing, the fact that she's a fever survivor, and so she ends up having a run-in with these highwaymen who are kind of bandits on the road one night who have been stealing things and cards from people, and so she kind of ends up having a run-in with them and ends up kind of joining forces with them because in order to break the curse of the kingdom, as well as kind of, I guess, banish the nightmare from her mind, she bands up with the highwaymen who have the same goal of wanting to do this, and to do that you have to get a full deck, one of each card. So you don't need like every copy of every card, but you need one of each, and they're missing several. And due to some of the things with the nightmare in her head, she's able to help them in a way that they kind of needed to accomplish this goal of putting the cards together. So that's kind of the main plot of the book. And so as far as the plot itself, I enjoyed that part of the plot. I do think the book started off pretty slow getting into. It took me like 2 or 3 days to read the first 20% of it, and then we kind of had an event that happened that kind of jump-started the plot more and hooked me more in, and then I read the last 80% in 2 days. So like, it really turned around once you hit that, I think it was around 20%. I think the plot really picked up a lot, and so unfortunately just a slow start. I think I've seen 1 or 2 reviews on Goodreads saying they DNF'd at like 10%. I'm like, dang, I could get it. It was slow, but if you hang on a little longer, it got better. And so yeah, but I definitely, once that plot kind of picked up, and also because once that plot picked up, we kind of had more secondary characters, and that's something I always like more, is when you go from having the one main character to finally pulling in the secondary characters into the plot. And it really took off from there, and I was definitely hooked on the plot from there. And then at the end of the book, she resolves one thread at the end of this book in a way that I definitely didn't expect, in the best way possible. Like, I'm complimenting her for the way she ended up taking it, because I kind of just expected it to go one way, just as like, I guess this will happen because that's kind of how it always happens in books. But she did something different, and like, props to her. And I'm intrigued to see how she's going to continue this thread, or I guess the fallout of this thread, in the next book. In addition to the plot, there's also a strongly present romance storyline between Elspeth and a secondary character, and I think this was probably one of the book's weakest points, was this romance. It, in theory, could have been good. Like, I was into what she wanted to do with this romance. It was an enemies to lovers setup, which I like. I thought the 2 characters like could have been good together, but it failed in that it turned from they hated each other, like with good reason, or they were enemies. I guess hate's not the right word. They were enemies with good reason, and then it was like all of a sudden they were like super into each other, and I was like, how did we get? We forgot to, like, come on. like you need some development. You need something to build to change the hatred. It was very insta-lovey, in that once they actually spend more than 2 seconds together, they went from like hard 180. Like, I needed just a little bit more of a build from enemies to love. Some stepping stones there. And so because of the instant love nature of it, I do think the romance plot ended up reading a little juvenile to me. Since I didn't totally buy that they were like in love, it kind of cheapened some of the later scenes when I just like wasn't totally buying into it. So scenes based on that, I'm like, are you really in love though? So definitely read like more of a juvenile kind of puppy love romance. One thing I have seen, this book is published as adult, but I've seen many people who assumed it was YA after reading it, or have read it and been like, this read more like YA, and I think this romance storyline is a large contributor as to why people said that, because all the reasons I just said, the juvenile nature of it. But I mean, I didn't hate it. It obviously, this romance storyline did not ruin the book for me, but just know that going in, to expect. Maybe don't read this if you're looking for like a really good adult level romance. Read it if you're interested in the other parts of the plot, I guess is what I'm saying here. So yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this book. I'm definitely very interested in picking up the second one whenever it should come out. next year, fingers crossed. Yeah, I definitely, if you like gothic vibes and if you like romantic fantasy, I would definitely recommend this. Even though I didn't like the romance, if you don't like romantic fantasy as a subgenre, you're definitely not gonna like it because the romance is definitely a big enough part that if you just hate romance, like don't read it. Even though I didn't love the romance, I still don't mind romance in the book. So even if it's a bad romance, like it's whatever, you know. If that makes sense. I think the closest title I could think of, like, if you liked this, try this one, might be The Wolf and the Wizman, my Ava read. I read that earlier this month, right before I read this one, and they both felt like books that would be read and enjoyed by the same people, though I think The Wolf and the Wizman executed the romance way better. But anyways, so if you've read or are interested in reading this book, let me know in the comments, and I will see you in my next video.